My entitled neighbor tried to steal my house. Now she's homeless and begging me for help. Hello, read it? People assume that when you buy a home, it's yours, your safe space, your personal haven, the foundation of your future. But I learned the hard way that ownership means nothing when someone decides they want to take what belongs to you. My name is Daniel, and I'm 34 years old. 2 years ago, my wife Sarah and I finally bought our first home. We had spent years saving, carefully planning, and dreaming of a place we could truly call our own. It wasn't extravagant or flashy, just a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It had everything we wanted: tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, and a backyard big enough for the dog we planned to adopt. For the first time in our lives, we felt like we had finally made it. It took less than a month for us to realize we had made a terrible mistake. Not because of the house itself. The house was perfect, solid foundation, plenty of space, and just enough quirks to give it character. But what we hadn't accounted for was Lisa. Lisa was our next-door neighbor, and from the moment we arrived, she made it clear that she didn't think we belonged. She was the type of woman who carried herself like she owned more than just her house, like she owned the entire street. Middle-aged, wealthy, and radiating entitlement, Lisa was the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. She didn't introduce herself, didn't welcome us, didn't even pretend to be friendly. She just watched. Every time we stepped outside, every time we carried in boxes, every time we so much as parked in our own driveway, she stood on her porch, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. At first, we thought she was just one of those nosy neighbors who kept tabs on everyone's business. Annoying, but harmless. We were wrong. Lisa wasn't just nosy. Lisa was territorial. It started with the driveway. Lisa had a massive SUV that barely fit in her own driveway. But instead of making adjustments, she simply parked halfway into ours. It was a daily occurrence, her car jutting over the line, blocking part of our space. At first, we assumed it was accidental, but when we politely mentioned it, she brushed it off like it wasn't a big deal. When we pressed further, she casually mentioned that she had always parked this way, that the previous owners never had a problem with it. That was her first mistake, assuming we would just accept her rules. Then came the property line disputes. A few weeks after moving in, I was in the backyard assembling a new patio set when Lisa came striding over, her usual smug expression firmly in place. Without any greeting or small talk, she pointed at our wooden fence and announced that it was on her property. According to her, the fence had been placed incorrectly and was encroaching on her land. We had already reviewed the property survey before buying the house, so we knew she was lying. The fence was exactly where it should be. But Lisa insisted, throwing out vague legal terms, claiming that the previous owners had borrowed part of her yard, as if land could be temporarily loaned out like a spare cup of sugar. Then she started calling the city. For the next few months, Lisa filed complaint after complaint about us. First, it was the fence. Then it was unauthorized landscaping, when we planted a few flowers in the front yard. Then it was a noise complaint when we had one dinner party with friends. Every time, a city inspector would come out, check everything, and confirm that we were in the clear. And every time, Lisa would act as if she had been personally wronged, sulking on her porch, watching us with thinly veiled contempt. Her hostility escalated in petty ways. Our mail started getting mixed up, with important letters mysteriously ending up in Lisa's mailbox. When we had packages delivered, they often went missing, only to miraculously reappear on Lisa's porch days later, conveniently opened. She always had an excuse. She thought they were hers. The address was confusing. The delivery driver must have made a mistake. It was infuriating, but not enough to take legal action. She was smart. She knew exactly how to push boundaries without crossing legal lines. Then came the construction nightmare. After settling in, Sarah and I decided to upgrade the backyard with a new deck. We had saved up for it, carefully planned it out, and followed every legal requirement. The moment construction began, Lisa lost her mind. She claimed the deck violated HOA rules, even though we weren't part of an HOA. She called the city multiple times, reporting us for illegal construction. Inspectors came, checked our permits, and told Lisa she was wasting their time. She wasn't satisfied. She doubled down, sending us anonymous letters demanding we respect the original design of the neighborhood. She even went as far as hiring a surveyor to try and prove we were in violation of property laws. She was obsessed. It all came to a boiling point one morning when I stepped outside to find trash strewn across our front yard. Bags of garbage had been deliberately ripped open, their contents spread across the grass. The smell was unbearable. Rotting food, discarded wrappers, and an unmistakable stench of something long past its expiration date. Someone had made a point to ensure it wasn't just dumped. It had been spread. I checked the security cameras, but the footage had been tampered with. Someone had sprayed the lens with a fine mist, blurring the image just enough to obscure any clear details. It wasn't hard to figure out who was responsible. Lisa had gone from being an annoyance to being a threat. At that point, Sarah and I considered getting a lawyer. Lisa had already made our lives miserable, but now she was actively sabotaging our home. Still, she was careful. Everything she did was just on the edge of plausible deniability. Not enough evidence to prove wrongdoing, not enough to press charges. It was a game to her, a slow, calculated effort to make us feel unwelcome. We were exhausted. Every little thing became a battle. Every decision, every upgrade, every moment of peace was under siege. And we still didn't understand why. We thought Lisa just hated having new neighbors, that she resented the change, that she wanted things to stay exactly as they had always been. But we were wrong. Lisa wasn't just trying to make us miserable. Lisa wanted us gone, and we were about to find out just how far she was willing to go. When Lisa scattered trash across our yard and tampered with our security cameras, Sarah and I knew things were escalating. But even then, we assumed it was nothing more than the antics of a bitter, territorial neighbor who resented our presence. We thought she was just making life difficult because she thrived on control. We had no idea that Lisa's real plan was much bigger than passive-aggressive harassment. We should have realized it sooner. Looking back, the signs were all there. The way she spoke about the previous owners, the way she acted as if our house was somehow temporary, like we were guests in a space that had belonged to her long before we arrived. But we were naive. We thought she was just a nuisance. We were wrong. Lisa wasn't just trying to drive us away for fun. She was trying to take our home. It started with the letters. At first, we thought they were from the city. Official-looking envelopes, neatly typed notices with formal language, stamped with what looked like a government seal. The first letter claimed that there were discrepancies with our property's ownership records. It was vague, full of legal jargon that neither of us fully understood, but the message was clear. Something was wrong with our deed. Sarah and I panicked. We had gone through all the proper channels when we bought the house, done everything by the book. How could there be issues? Was there some sort of mistake? Could someone really challenge our ownership after we had already been living there for months? We contacted our real estate agent and the title company that had handled the sale. They both assured us that everything was legitimate. There were no problems with our deed, no disputes, nothing that could justify the claims in the letter. Their advice was simple: ignore it. So we did, until the second letter arrived. This one was different. It wasn't typed. It wasn't from the city. It was handwritten in perfectly neat cursive, with no return address. Just a single message written in dark ink across expensive stationery. This house does not belong to you. It never did. Get out while you still can. The moment I read it, something clicked. Lisa. It had to be her. Everything made sense. The constant interference, the surveillance, the ridiculous complaints. She wasn't just an entitled neighbor who didn't like us. She was actively trying to make us leave. And now, she wasn't just harassing us, she was trying to scare us out. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made my pulse spike. Every creak in the house had me on edge. Lisa had already proven that she wasn't above trespassing. If she was bold enough to mess with our security cameras, what else was she willing to do? I spent the next morning going through public records to see if I could find anything about Lisa's connection to our home. And what I found shocked me. Lisa didn't just live next door. She had once owned our house. Years ago, before we had even considered moving to this neighborhood, our house had belonged to Lisa and her ex-husband. They had lived here for over a decade, but after an ugly divorce, she had lost the house in the settlement. Her husband had sold it to another family, and Lisa had moved into the house next door. And now, after all these years, she wanted it back. The realization sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just a game to her. She had lived in our house, she had owned it, and in her twisted mind, she still saw it as hers. And now, she was trying to take it from us. I told Sarah everything, watching the color drain from her face as the pieces started falling into place. Lisa had never accepted losing this house. She had probably hated the families who had lived here after her, but she had never been able to do anything about it. Until now. Until we moved in, until she saw an opportunity. We needed a plan. I started documenting everything. Every letter, every complaint she had filed, every suspicious incident. We installed new security cameras, making sure they were out of reach. I bought motion-activated floodlights for the yard, set up alerts for any movement near the property. If Lisa wanted to escalate, I was going to be ready, but what I wasn't ready for was what happened next. A few days later, while I was at work, Sarah called me in a panic. Someone had come to the house while she was home alone. A man in a suit. He had knocked on the door and handed her legal documents. Real ones, not like the fake notices Lisa had been sending. These were official, notarized with case numbers and legal signatures. They were eviction papers. Lisa was suing us. She was claiming fraudulent ownership of our home, alleging that the sale had been illegally processed and that we were living in a house that still belonged to her. Lisa wasn't just trying to scare us away anymore. She was trying to steal our home through the courts. We met with a lawyer immediately. He was just as baffled as we were. Lisa's lawsuit was insane. Her argument was weak, her evidence non-existent. But the problem was she had money. Enough money to drag us through a lengthy legal battle if she wanted to. And she did. Over the next few weeks, things escalated even further. Lisa wasn't just relying on the legal system. She was continuing her campaign of harassment. More fake letters arrived. More false complaints were filed with the city. One morning, we woke up to find a for sale sign planted in our front yard, as if she was already celebrating her victory. The stress was overwhelming. Sarah was exhausted, constantly on edge, terrified that Lisa would take things even further. Our savings were draining fast, lawyers weren't cheap, and even though our case was solid, Lisa was relentless. She showed up to every hearing, dressed like she was walking into a business meeting, always with an air of confidence that made my stomach turn. She genuinely believed she was going to win. But what Lisa didn't realize was that she had made a fatal mistake. In her obsession with reclaiming the house, she had forged documents, and she had left behind just enough evidence for us to prove it. Lisa had thought she could manipulate the system, intimidate us into giving up, and walk away with the home she believed was still hers. But she had underestimated just how far we were willing to go to fight back. And she had no idea that she was about to face a financial disaster of her own making. Lisa thought she had everything figured out. She had money, confidence, and an almost delusional sense of ownership over our home. In her mind, this wasn't a scheme. This was a correction. She had convinced herself that she was reclaiming something that was rightfully hers, that we were just temporary obstacles standing in the way of what she had lost. But what Lisa hadn't accounted for was that we weren't going to roll over and let her take what belonged to us. She had money, yes, but we had truth on our side. And in the end, that was all we needed. From the moment we met with our lawyer, it was clear that Lisa's case was built on lies. Her lawsuit was filled with baseless claims. Accusations that the title transfer on our home had been done improperly, that there had been fraud in the sale, that the previous owners had never legally relinquished ownership. It was nonsense, but legally, it still required a response. We had to prove, beyond any doubt, that we were the rightful owners of the house. And that meant months of stress, legal fees, and court appearances. All because Lisa couldn't let go of the past. Lisa's confidence was infuriating. Every time we saw her, she carried herself like she had already won. She walked past our house with her chin lifted high, her posture smug, as if she was just waiting for the day we would be forced to pack up and leave. Even in the courtroom, she behaved as if she was in control, sitting there in expensive designer clothing, her hands folded neatly in her lap, as if this was just another one of her investments that was about to pay off. But what Lisa didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that she had made a critical mistake. During one of our legal meetings, our lawyer asked us a simple but important question. Did Lisa submit any evidence to support her claim? Up until that point, we had been focused on defending ourselves, on proving that our own documents were legitimate. But our lawyer was thinking ahead. If Lisa was claiming ownership, she needed proof. She needed documents, records, something, and that's when we found it. Buried in the hundreds of pages of legal paperwork Lisa had submitted, there was a forged document. It was a fake property transfer record, one that listed Lisa as the original owner and claimed that there had been a mistake in the chain of title. At first glance, it looked real: official stamps, proper formatting, even what appeared to be signatures from previous owners. But there was one glaring issue. The date on Lisa's document was from a year when the house had already been owned by another family. Lisa had fabricated an entire transfer of ownership in an attempt to make it seem as though she had a legal claim to the house. But in doing so, she had made a critical error. She had placed herself as the owner at a time when the house had already changed hands. Our real estate records showed a clear and documented chain of ownership that proved Lisa's claim was impossible. And that was all we needed. The moment we presented this to our lawyer, his expression changed. Lisa hadn't just filed a frivolous lawsuit. She had committed fraud. That changed everything. Our lawyer wasted no time drafting a response that not only disproved Lisa's claims, but also exposed her forgery. The moment the judge saw the contradictory records, the case collapsed. The court ordered an immediate investigation into Lisa's submitted documents, and within days, it was confirmed. Lisa had falsified legal records. And now, she was the one in trouble. Lisa's smug confidence shattered overnight. She went from strutting around the neighborhood to avoiding eye contact, her carefully composed image crumbling under the weight of her own lies. The investigation revealed that Lisa had doctored multiple documents to make it seem as though she still had an ownership stake in the property. And the consequences for that? Severe. Lisa was now facing legal penalties for filing fraudulent claims, attempting to commit real estate fraud, and wasting the court's time. The judge dismissed her case with prejudice, meaning she could never file another claim on the property. But that was just the beginning of her downfall. With her fraud exposed, Lisa was ordered to pay for all our legal fees. Every lawyer consultation, every court filing, every hour spent fighting her baseless lawsuit, all of it was now her responsibility. The total? Nearly $200,000. Lisa had tried to steal our house, and instead, she had bankrupted herself. Word spread quickly around the neighborhood. People who had once tolerated Lisa's arrogance now openly gossiped about her downfall. The woman who had once lorded over the street with an air of superiority was now a social pariah, humiliated and drowning in legal consequences of her own making. But even then, Lisa wasn't finished. She had lost the case. She had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And now, she was desperate. That's when she did something even worse. A week after the ruling, we woke up to find spray paint covering our garage door. Sloppy, rushed letters spelled out thieves and liars. The security cameras caught everything. Lisa, in the middle of the night, dressed in dark clothes, vandalizing our home in a final act of revenge. And that was the final straw. Lisa wasn't just a disgraced fraudster anymore. Now, she was facing criminal charges. Lisa had spent months trying to destroy us, to steal our home, to wear us down until we had no choice but to leave. But instead, she had dug her own grave. She had filed a fraudulent lawsuit, manipulated legal documents, harassed us relentlessly, and now, after months of playing dirty, it had all come crashing down on her. Her case was dismissed, her forgeries were exposed, and she was left drowning in over $200,000 in legal fees. The woman who once carried herself with an air of untouchable entitlement was now a financial disaster, her perfect life in complete ruin. The neighborhood, once fearful of her sharp tongue and manipulative ways, now watched with morbid curiosity as Lisa lost everything. But Lisa wasn't the kind of person who knew how to lose gracefully. The night she vandalized our home, she sealed her fate. When we stepped outside and saw thick red spray paint covering our garage door, our first thought was that it had been some random act of vandalism. But as we looked closer, it was clear that this wasn't just some petty prank. The words had been chosen deliberately. Thieves, liars, cheaters. Someone was furious. Someone wanted us to feel like we were the villains. And there was only one person in the world who hated us that much. The security footage confirmed our suspicions. There she was, Lisa, in the middle of the night, dressed in dark clothing, a can of spray paint in her hand, moving quickly but not carefully enough to avoid being caught on camera. It wasn't grainy footage or a blurry face, it was her. Clear as day. We called the police immediately. When the officers arrived, they didn't just take our statement. They watched the footage right there in our driveway. The moment they saw Lisa on the screen, vandalizing our home, their entire demeanor changed. This wasn't just a civil dispute anymore. This was criminal. Property damage, trespassing, harassment. Lisa had officially crossed the line. The officers wasted no time walking over to Lisa's house and knocking on her door. We stood outside, watching as she answered, still dressed in her silk robe, her expression smug, as if she had been expecting to get away with this. She barely spoke at first, just shaking her head, crossing her arms, acting as though she had no idea what was going on. But the moment they showed her the footage, her entire expression shifted. Her lips parted slightly. Her eyes darted to the officers' hands where they held the tablet playing the footage. And for the first time in all the months we had known her, Lisa looked afraid. She tried to lie at first. She claimed it wasn't her, that we had doctored the footage, that this was some elaborate conspiracy against her. The officers, unimpressed, asked if she wanted to make her official statement at the station. And just like that, Lisa was in handcuffs, being led to the police car as the entire neighborhood watched. It should have been satisfying, but in that moment, all I felt was exhaustion. This battle had consumed so much of our time, our energy, our peace of mind. It had drained months of our lives, and now, finally, Lisa was going to pay for everything she had done. But at what cost? As Lisa was taken away, Sarah exhaled beside me, tension finally releasing from her shoulders. But even then, I could tell she wasn't celebrating yet, because Lisa wasn't done losing. The vandalism charge alone would have been bad enough, but Lisa wasn't just facing a fine. She had committed multiple offenses. Her fraudulent lawsuit, her forged documents, her harassment, it was all being rolled into a single case. The judge overseeing the fraud case decided to combine the charges, treating it as a pattern of harassment and fraud. And then the final nail in the coffin came. Lisa's ex-husband testified against her. Apparently, he had been following the case from a distance, and when he heard about the fraud charges, he decided to come forward with his own evidence. He told the court that Lisa had pulled similar stunts in the past. She had a history of manipulating property sales, forging documents before, and had even been investigated years ago for financial fraud during their divorce. The court had heard enough. Lisa wasn't just losing money anymore. She was going to jail. The judge sentenced her to 6 months in prison for filing fraudulent documents, 3 additional months for vandalism, and ordered her to pay an additional $50,000 in damages. The woman who had once stood outside our home, smiling smugly as she filed baseless complaints against us, was now being led away in handcuffs. But that wasn't all. Lisa's house, the one next to ours, the one she had been so desperate to keep, was seized and auctioned off to pay her debts. She had fought so hard to steal our home, but in the end, she was the one who lost everything. The final time we ever saw Lisa was the day she was evicted. She had spent so long trying to take our home, but now she was the one losing hers. We stood in our driveway and watched as she was forced to pack her belongings into a moving truck, her once arrogant demeanor replaced with silent humiliation. There was no confidence, no smugness, no entitlement left. She didn't even look at us. She didn't say a word. She just climbed into her car and drove away. And just like that, Lisa was gone. But karma wasn't finished with her yet. A few months later, we learned that Lisa's financial ruin had only gotten worse. The fraud charges had not only bankrupted her, but had also blacklisted her from any future property ownership. She had lost her assets, her reputation, and her entire standing in the community. Rumors circulated that she had moved in with a distant relative, completely broke, living off whatever scraps she could manage. For someone who had spent years looking down on others, who had once walked around our neighborhood like she owned the world, it was the ultimate fall from grace. And yet, even after all of that, I sometimes still wonder if Lisa ever truly understood what happened to her. Because in the end, her destruction wasn't caused by anyone else. She had done it to herself. Lisa was gone. After months of legal battles, harassment, and outright insanity, she had finally been forced to face the consequences of her own actions. Her attempt to steal our home had cost her everything: her savings, her reputation, and ultimately, her freedom. She had spent months tearing her own life apart, brick by brick, convinced that she could force reality to bend in her favor. But in the end, she had lost everything. By the time she was released from prison, she was a completely different person from the woman who had once walked through the neighborhood with her head held high, as if she owned the entire street. For the first few months after her downfall, life finally returned to normal. Sarah and I settled back into the peaceful existence we had been fighting for all along. The neighborhood, which had spent so much time under Lisa's control, seemed lighter, as if her presence had been a weight pressing down on everyone. The new owners of Lisa's old house, a quiet, elderly couple, kept to themselves, barely interacting with anyone beyond polite waves. The chapter with Lisa had been closed, and we were more than happy to forget she had ever existed. But karma wasn't done with her yet. A year passed without a word about Lisa. Most people assumed she had left town, disappeared into obscurity, trying to salvage whatever was left of her life. We didn't think about her, didn't talk about her, didn't care. And then out of nowhere, I got a phone call. The number was unfamiliar. At first, I almost ignored it, but something in my gut told me to answer. The voice on the other end was weak, shaking, barely above a whisper. It took me a few seconds to even process who it was. Lisa. I hadn't heard her voice since the court case. But now she sounded different. There was no arrogance, no smugness, no condescending tone. She sounded small, broken, like someone who had spent too much time fighting a war they never had a chance of winning. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't even acknowledge what had happened between us. Instead, she got right to the point. She needed money. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke that maybe I had misheard her. But she wasn't joking. She was desperate. Lisa had nothing left. She had spent her savings fighting a losing battle, had no home, no steady income, and had burned every bridge she had ever built. Her ex-husband refused to help her. Her family had cut her off. She was living out of her car, too ashamed to go to a shelter, too proud to beg on the street. And now, after everything, she was coming to me. I let her speak, saying nothing as she explained her situation, her voice wavering, her breath shaky. She was begging. She wanted to know if I could loan her some money, just enough for rent, just enough to get her back on her feet, just enough to start over. I should have laughed. I should have hung up. But instead, I asked her a question I had been wondering for a long time. Why did you do it? The line was silent for a long time. Then, Lisa exhaled, and for the first time, she told the truth. It was never about me or Sarah. It wasn't even about the house, not really. Lisa had spent her entire life winning. She had built an image of herself as powerful, untouchable, above everyone else. When she lost the house in the divorce, it shattered that illusion. She had convinced herself that she could get it back, that if she just fought hard enough, manipulated enough people, threw enough money at the problem, she could rewrite history. But she hadn't accounted for losing. And when she finally did, it broke her. She had destroyed herself. And she knew it. Lisa was still waiting for my answer. She was still hoping that, despite everything, I would help her. I thought about it for a long moment. Then I told her the truth. No, I wasn't cruel about it. I didn't yell or mock her or remind her of what she had done. I just told her no. And when she started crying, when she whispered something about not knowing where else to go, I simply told her that was never my problem to fix. Then I hung up. Lisa never called again. A few months later, we heard a rumor about her from a neighbor who still kept tabs on the town gossip. Apparently, Lisa had left town completely broke, moving from motel to motel, staying with whoever would take her in. She had no job, no assets, no way to rebuild her life. The house she had been so desperate to steal from us had been sold, remodeled, and was now unrecognizable. Everything she had fought for, everything she had destroyed herself over, was gone. But that wasn't the most shocking part. A year after that call, we learned that Lisa had been arrested again. This time, it wasn't for fraud or vandalism. It was for identity theft. She had tried to forge financial documents again, using someone else's name to apply for credit, and had been caught immediately. Apparently, she had never learned. She had spent her entire life believing she was above the rules, that the world would bend to her will if she just pushed hard enough. But reality had finally caught up to her. Lisa had once been the wealthiest woman on our street. She had once held power over the entire neighborhood, walking around like she was untouchable. And now, she was nothing more than a cautionary tale. I don't know where she is now. And honestly, I don't care. Lisa spent her entire life trying to control others, to bend the world to her will, to take what she wanted without consequence. But in the end, the only person she destroyed was herself. And I'll never lose a second of sleep over it.